All right, strap yourselves in because we're going deep on Hong Kong Godfather. This 1985 film, man, it sounds wild. We're pulling all our info from a review on Cool Ass Cinema, the website.
Yeah.
They're all about those awesomely bizarre, kind of hidden exploitation flicks. And that's right up my alley.
And what a ride it seems to be. The review puts Hong Kong Godfather right at a fascinating point, a real turning point for Hong Kong cinema. It was one of the last big productions from the legendary Shaw Brothers studio, right when they were, losing their grip on the scene.
Yeah, the reviewer mentioned that around this time, Shaw Brothers was moving more into television. Guess even the biggest names in film had to adapt, right?
Exactly. It was happening right as this, what they called new wave Hong Kong action cinema was blowing up. Directors like John Woo, Tsui Hark, they were bringing this fresh, super kinetic style to the screen. So Hong Kong Godfather, it's like this crazy mix of the old and the new, like a snapshot of a genre transforming right in front of you.
It makes you wonder if it's more like those classic Shaw Brothers martial arts epics, or if it's a taste of that stylish, over-the-top action Hong Kong cinema got known for later on.
Well, the reviewer makes this really interesting comparison between the director Wang Lung-wei and Chang Che. He's often called the godfather of Hong Kong action cinema. They both had this thing for the dramatic, especially when it came to violence. Picture like operatic bloodshed. Every fight's a brutal ballet.
Wow, okay. I can see it. And the reviewer's not shying away from how graphic it is. They even say there was a cut version, like going around for a bit, without all the really extreme stuff.
Yeah.
But good thing we've got the uncut one, huh? Got to go all in for the full impact.
Really makes you think about censorship and how different cuts, they create totally different experiences.
Totally. But here, the reviewer seems to think the violence, even though it's intense, isn't just there for shock value. They say it actually gives the story more depth, makes the characters and what they go through even more powerful, hit harder.
Now that's interesting. It's a tough thing to do, to make violence actually, serve the story instead of just being there for the shock. You gotta have strong characters, a story that grabs you.
Speaking of characters, the reviewer talks about how women are portrayed. Seems like a real, contradiction there. On one hand, you've got violence against women, which sadly is a pretty common thing in a lot of action movies. But then there's this major female character who's apparently a total badass in fights.
Yeah, that kind of back and forth reflects something complex about Hong Kong cinema, especially in the wuxia genre, with all the swordplay and martial arts. Wuxia, literally it means martial heroes. And while it usually focuses on male heroes, strong female characters are a big part of it.
So not just damsels in distress waiting for a rescue.
Nope, not at all. These women can fight, and their stories, they often explore themes of agency, rebellion. It even led to the whole girls with guns subgenre, celebrating those powerful female characters. But as the reviewer points out, there's always that push and pull, that tension between empowerment and exploitation. And how that plays out in Hong Kong Godfather, well, we'll have to see.
Okay, so we've got crazy action, intriguing characters, and this historical backdrop that just adds another layer of, complexity. What more could you ask for?
How about a climax set in a shopping mall? Full-on bloodshed and mayhem.
Oh wait, a shopping mall.
Yeah.
You don't see that every day in a gangster movie.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder if they were filming during business hours. Imagine just trying to get your groceries while a bloody battle's raging in the food court.
And this is where it gets really interesting. The reviewer says the mall looks a lot like the one in, Jackie Chan's Police Story, which also came out in '85. Using the same locations, it wasn't unusual in Hong Kong cinema. It's part of a trend, I guess, to use real places, give those action scenes a gritty, almost documentary feel.
That is so cool. Blurs the line between what's real and what's fiction.
Right.
Adds this whole other dimension, like you're right there in the action.
Exactly. And it kind of connects Hong Kong Godfather with a more mainstream action movie like Police Story. It shows how different styles and trends in Hong Kong cinema were kind of talking to each other.
This is already sounding like a wild ride, and we haven't even touched on the fashion. The reviewer mentions those classic 80s looks. Big hair, bold colors, the whole 9 yards.
And even though the reviewer says the fashion might be a bit, dated, they emphasize how intense the action and the gore is. Like it more than makes up for any possible kitsch. They even tie it back to Chang Che's influence, mentioning vengeance and the duel. They were known for, extreme violence.
Sounds like Hong Kong Godfather takes that over-the-top action, that legacy, and cranks it up even more. I'm getting the feeling this film it's not for the faint of heart.
That's definitely the vibe I'm getting from the reviewer. It's like they're saying the violence in Hong Kong Godfather it's more than just exploitation. It's a choice, a stylistic choice, to really show the brutality of the gangster world.
Makes you think about the director, right? Were they trying to, like, shock audiences? Or was there a deeper artistic reason for all the bloodshed?
That's a really good question, and one we should, dig into more as we explore this film.
Okay, I am hooked. Tell me more. Let's talk about what the reviewer says about how the film was released, how it got out there. Apparently, it wasn't exactly a smooth ride.
Not exactly. The reviewer talks about the different companies involved, like Funimation and BCI, and how the film finally ended up with Funimation. They also mentioned Celestial Pictures. They own that massive Shaw Brothers library. They had these big plans to release everything, but it didn't quite pan out.
That's a bummer. Can you imagine all those classic films just sitting there? It makes you appreciate that we can even see Hong Kong Godfather, even if it took a while to get a proper release.
It really highlights how hard film preservation and distribution is. Especially for older films from other cultures. It reminds us that we have to, really work to keep these films out there, share them with everyone.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've covered the history, the director's style, the characters, that crazy climax in a mall, and even touched on how the film was released. What's next?
I think it's time to get to the heart of it. The violence, the reviewers arguing it's more than just gratuitous bloodshed, that it means something, adds to the characters and their struggles. But is that really true?
Let's see.
It's like the reviewers saying that the violence in Hong Kong Godfather, it's more than just a style thing. They see it as like connected to the time it was made. Back then, Hong Kong cinema was really pushing the limits, exploring all that darkness in people.
Yeah, I get that. The 80s were, they were wild, right? All those gritty action flicks coming out of Hollywood too. I think it was like a worldwide thing, this need to push what you could show on screen.
Interesting, yeah. Like global cinema was shifting, embracing this raw, this unflinching way of telling stories.
It makes you wonder how people back then reacted to this much violence. Was it like shocking? Or was it just, I don't know, normal for Hong Kong action films?
Remember the reviewer mentioned Hong Kong Godfather had that cut version at first? That kind of suggests people were worried about the really intense stuff, even in Hong Kong. It shows that culture really shapes how we see violence in movies and stuff.
So what might have been shocking to people in one country could be totally fine in another.
Totally. And even in the same culture, things change over time. What was extreme in the 80s might seem tame now, or the other way around. It's always changing, Influenced by what's acceptable, censorship, even how special effects get better.
That's a good point. I remember watching some old action movies from the 80s and thinking, wow, that's pretty over the top. And then again, maybe it was like groundbreaking back then.
It all depends how you look at it. And that's one of the things that makes watching these older films like Hong Kong Godfather so interesting. They show us a different time, make us rethink our own limits, what we expect.
So are you saying there's more to Hong Kong Godfather than just, explosions and blood? Why should our listener care about this movie?
It's not just a dumb action flick, This film is like a window into this specific moment in Hong Kong cinema, when the old ways were fading and new filmmakers were coming up, each with their own vision, their own style. Hong Kong Godfather is right in the middle of all that.
I see what you're saying. It's not just about being entertained. It's about understanding how a genre changes, the culture behind it, and maybe even thinking about how our own ideas about violence in movies have changed over time.
Exactly. And the reviewer really stresses that the characters have depth, the story has layers. It's not just mindless action, it's about loyalty, betrayal, ambition, that fight for power. Those things, they're universal, they speak to everyone.
So even if you're not a huge Hong Kong action film fan, Hong Kong Godfather still has something to offer.
Absolutely. It's a one-of-a-kind movie experience, one that might surprise you with how deep and complex it is. And hey, maybe you'll even come around to those 80s hairstyles.
I don't know about that.
Yeah.
But I'm getting pretty excited to check this movie out. It sounds like a wild ride, and I'm always up for an adventure.
And that's exactly what a good review should do. It makes you curious, makes you want to experience the film for yourself.
All right, so before we wrap things up, let's recap what we've learned about Hong Kong Godfather so far.
Okay, let's put it all together.
We talked about the Shaw Brothers studio, how it was, declining.
And how new wave Hong Kong action cinema was taking off.
The influence of Chan Che and his unique style of violence.
How women are portrayed, the complexities there,
The difficulties of preserving and distributing films.
and how ideas about violence in media, they're always evolving.
Wow, we've covered a lot.
We have. And this brings us to a final thought-provoking question for you, our listener.
After all this talk about violence in Hong Kong Godfather, what's the takeaway for our listener? Is this movie just like glorifying brutality, or is there more to it?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? Is the extreme violence just there to be shocking, exploitative, or is it a stylistic choice, a reflection of that specific time in Hong Kong cinema? And thinking bigger, how has action cinema in general changed how it shows violence, and what's behind those changes? Tough questions, no easy answers, but definitely things to think about while you're watching Hong Kong Godfather.
It's like we've got this puzzle box, right? And we have all these pieces, the history, the director's influences, what was typical for the genre, and now it's up to the viewer to put it all together, make sense of it.
Exactly, and that's what makes this whole deep dive so interesting, I think. We're not just passively taking in info, we're engaging with it, really thinking about it, questioning our assumptions, forming our own interpretations.
You know, I've got to admit, I was a little hesitant at first. I mean, a movie called Hong Kong Godfather with all this over-the-top violence sounded like it might be, just pure exploitation. But now I'm genuinely curious. I want to see how it all unfolds.
And that's the magic of film. It can surprise you, challenge those ideas you had going in, make you think about the world in new ways.
Okay, so before we send our listener off on their own Hong Kong Godfather adventure, any final thoughts? What should they keep in mind while watching?
Just remember, context is key. Try to watch the film through the lens of the time it was made. Think about the cultural influences, the genre conventions that shaped it. And don't be afraid to question what you see. Is the violence serving a purpose in the story, or does it go too far, become exploitative? It's up to you to decide.
Good advice. And if our listener, wants to go even further, dive deeper into Hong Kong cinema, any suggestions?
Of course. If you want to see where Hong Kong Godfather fits in with Wang Lung-wei's other films, I'd recommend Danger Has Two Faces and Men from the Gutter. And of course, you can't go wrong with Chang-Chi, especially Vengeance and The Duel. They're classics for a reason. They'll give you a real appreciation for how Hong Kong action cinema has evolved.
So much to watch, so little time. Well, that wraps up our deep dive on Hong Kong Godfather. We've explored the history, the style, the controversial parts, and its impact on the action genre. Hope you've come away with a new appreciation for this unique, often overlooked gem of Hong Kong cinema. Now go out there and experience the mayhem for yourselves.